Oh, hey. Did you get Phil's first character built for the 5th edition campaign I'm going to be running?
All done. I think he'll like this one. It's a gnome barbarian, which, when you have intelligence as a stat and has no strength, it doesn't really work great, but if he gets really creative with all the stuff that he buys, then it should work out.
We need a simple 5th edition class race combination.
Oh, right. Beginner. He hasn't played before, has he?
That's hence first.
I'll go work on this. Alright, I had this great idea when I was working on it. So, he'll be a halfling divination wizard who will get to reroll, like, every one 8 times a day. I mean, he'll have to memorize the entire 5th ed magic system in, like, 48 hours, but,
Really?
You know what? That was deserved. Alright, so we've been going at this the wrong way. Why reinvent the wheel? I already have character sheets. I'll just teach him to be Adonis Averici.
Adonis Averici.
Yeah.
The tiefling bard from Nathan's campaign.
That's the one.
Nathan, who was not born in the same universe as the box he thinks outside of, had migraines every session dealing with the shenanigans of a day in the life of Adonis Averici. And the rest of the party was swept up in Adonis's wake in whatever half-baked cockamamie scheme he came up with in the moment to get rich quick, or settle that score with that dragon, or get even with that one city guardsman who looked at him funny. You know what? No. You. No.
So, we'll just make him a human fighter?
Thank you.
Alright.
Adonis Averici.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome to another episode of Unqualified Experts. I'm your host, Braden Gardner.
I'm your other host, the Corrupt Overlord, Shane Dayton.
And today we want to take a step back from some of the more complicated points of 5th edition D&D and actually kind of help lay some foundational work for those who are just starting to get into it for the first time.
Exactly. And you don't have to be playing too long before you get ideas for very strange character builds, or if you're like me, boy, how can I cause a lot of mischief this campaign? Because there's always a way. There is always a way. But it also wasn't that long ago where I actually played my very first game, which was 5th edition. And when I had no familiarity at all with tabletop role-playing, with D&D, it was overwhelming. Stuff I take for granted now just kind of went straight over the head. And fortunately, Braden was really good in trying to give me advice, let me know which classes would be hard to pick up on, which would be easier. And then I made, which I think was a very good decision for a newbie, I chose Ranger over Druid.
Yeah, that was a good call.
So for learning the system, and don't get me wrong, I look forward to playing the Druid class in future campaigns, but for a pure beginner, yeah, Druid would not have been the way to go. But one of the things about choosing a class that's a bit too complex for your first go is it can really take the fun out of it. And D&D and other tabletop games are just so much fun. There's such good stories to be told. There are great friendships made with the group. If you're spending all your time confused about what you can do, what you can't do, feeling kind of conscientious because you're not contributing at the same level, or you feel like you're slowing down gameplay, that's just not a fun place to be in. And so, if you're the type who gets a little bit overwhelmed with a new system, we're going to go over some of the different classes and combos that are just really beginner friendly, and then which ones maybe you should steer away from.
Now, before we dive into that conversation, there are 2 points that we want to make sure are clear as assumptions that we're taking for the entirety of this conversation. First, in regards to picking a race for your character, humans are always an optimal choice. They're super versatile. There are 2 different layouts for them, depending on whether your DM allows you to play variant humans.
They're overpowered pretty much for everything, so...
As I said, they get the most points for stat boosts and a variety of other benefits on top of that. Human is always going to be a good choice.
Yeah.
The second thing that we're going to be assuming is that your DM is not using the optional stat rules from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that allow you to mix and match any race with any stat bonus. We're speaking predominantly about the stat bonuses and benefits conferred as written in the Player's Handbook and Volo's Guide to Monsters.
Yeah, and it's a 50-50 thing. So if your DM says, no, we do the Tasha's rules, you can use any stat block you want, then whenever we mention the best races to play, the answer is all of them. But a lot of DMs don't play with that rule or put limitations on it, so we still want to let you know what the best traditional combinations are. So, Group 1, you're coming to a new game, and you're not sure what to play. If you're the person who says, I want to tank and thwack people, cool. Option 1, you want to be a barbarian. You get angry, you hit things. You don't get hurt nearly as much when they hit you, and then you hit things again. Did I miss anything?
No, that's the tweet with Barbarian. And when you're playing a Barbarian, there are a few different good race options to pick to pair alongside it. You've got the half-orc, the dwarf, and the Goliath from Volos.
Yeah. Basically, you're looking for strength and constitution because you want a lot of hit points because you will be taking hits up front, and you want to be able to hit people hard. And so when you find any of the groups that have good strength, good constitution, you get the D12 hit die because you're expected to be a tank as the Barbarian. If your idea of fun is tanking and then thwacking people, Barbarian is a very good call for the first timer.
Absolutely. Now, if you're looking for something a little more nuanced, and I use the term a little loosely here, if you're wanting to do the traditional sword and board and have access to a little bit of healing on top of that, then Paladin is probably going to be more your speed. Paladins are generally good at buffing not only themselves, they also utilize auras that buff the party, and they're well suited to taking a beating on top of those other benefits.
Yeah, they are basically armored versions of barbarians with a few extra pretty things on the side. And the nice thing about it is, like, when you talk about auras, it's like, oh, what's that? It's literally something you get level up that makes everybody happier with you. Because you're giving them attack bonuses or dodge bonuses. And so since it's not here's 10 options, it's very, very easy to learn. Paladins can be a lot of fun. I mean, you want the strength, you actually get armor, which bonus definitely helps with the tanking. And unlike the Barbarian, you can heal yourself when things go a little bit sideways.
Very true. And either Dragonborn or Tieflings are well suited to being Paladins. Their stat bonuses support some of your class features really well.
Yep.
And unlike other classes that have access to spells, if you decide you don't want to learn the 5th edition magic system, great, those spells are now smites.
Yeah, and even if you do, those spells are usually going to end up being smites. So it works pretty well both ways. Whether you want to dip your toes into magic or whether you just want to hit harder, Paladin. And then, of course, there is Fighter, which is very good fighting. Who knew?
The fighter can fight?
I know, shocking, right?
I'm stopping the presses.
And so the one reason Fighter kind of comes in third for us is the Fighter the number of options can be a bit more complex. Like, you can take fighter a lot of different directions because they're meant to be the versatile fighting class. They can use all the armors, all the weapons. You have 5 or 6 different options just from the main player's handbook for, oh, I want this skill or this ability. So, once again, it's not bad. It's very learnable, but if you want as little to learn as possible your first time through, just so you can get immersed and get used to the system, Fighter is going to be a bit more complicated than Barbarian or even Paladin for most people. But it's still a very beginner-friendly option. Plus, you could just, what was that joke at? Take more Fighter with your Fighter. You can just choose the hit harder and more often options, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Pretty much. I mean, Human Fighter is literally the most commonly played class race combination in 5th edition. And that's not just me blowing smoke.
They've done the studies.
They've done the studies. It is statistically proven.
And it's not even close, if I recall correctly.
It really is. So you can set your fighter up to do any number of different things. And because they can use literally anything they touch, basically, they're ideally suited for tanking.
Yep, they do their thing. So, all right, Braden. So, what should I play if I don't want to tank, but I want to sneak?
Well, the obvious pick for sneaking, and it's been the obvious one for a long, long time in D&D, is the rogue.
Yep.
Rogues are very good at sneaking. They're generally tailored to be a very dexterous class, but you can also play them in other directions as well. So if you want to be good at smooth talking in addition to sneaking, great, you can do that. The other nice thing about rogues is once you get to a certain level, if you're proficient in a skill, the worst you can roll is a 10. So it's very beginner friendly.
Very useful. Yeah. There's a point where you're just always going to be useful to the party. You are the fallback jack of all trades. And sneak attack is just awesome. You might not be able to hit as often as the fighter. You may not be able to just roar and go up like the barbarian. But man, if they don't see you, that dagger attack gets a lot of extra dice.
Very much so. And you may not hit as often, but you're definitely going to hit harder every time you do. Now, like I mentioned before, dexterity is the primary stat that most rogues are going to value. So the races that you're going to want to play are going to lean into that as well. Your elves, your halflings, your tabaxi. They're going to lean much more heavily into the dexterity side of things, and you can go the charisma route as well. Like I mentioned, a lot of the things that the rogues are generally good at are working with people, so you can be sneaky with your words.
A favorite subclass I've heard too is the half-orc rogue, who uses intimidation as opposed to sneaking around. So that's the bouncer at the back of the shady alley instead of the guy trying to pickpocket you.
This isn't Pathfinder, and that isn't common.
It's a lot of fun, though.
I believe you.
But rogues, if you want to sneak, like, rogues have ridiculous abilities to sneak, and it's a very fun class to play. The other one is basically the rogue of the woods, the ranger. Also very big on dex, also very big on being able to sneak around. Again, you're going to be looking at elves, halflings, tabaxis. Rangers are also a good class if you want to dip your toes into magic, or you think you might want to. But it's also not necessary. So I know my first ranger, I just didn't get the magic system early on, so I didn't even pick my spells the first 3 levels, because it just didn't matter. And then they informed me, hey, you know how to play now. There's some really good spells you really should pick. Like, Pass Without a Trace, which lets you sneak even more in the woods. So, if you like sneaking, if you're in the city, rogue. If you're in the woods, ranger.
That's a pretty fair assessment. I mean, you can play either in other settings as well, but it's a good rule of thumb to follow. I have no issue with that as kind of the laid out option.
And if you're going to dip your toes into multi-classing with a group that allows it, Rogue Ranger actually is one of the more common combos because they use the same stats. They often do the same thing. It fits together without having to change much.
It works out really well. I like that combination a lot because you get kind of the best of both worlds. You get the rogue's exceptional ability to stealth and I think some versions of the rogue also can double their bonuses for their stealthing skills. And then you get the ranger's ability to pass without a trace, and suddenly, oops, Shane rolled a 41 on his stealth check, and I hate everything, as he's not even sure he exists anymore.
Good roll for a beginner.
Yeah, it was.
So moving on, before Braden has an embolism. Braden, I want to be an archer.
Well, gee. What about the Rogue of the Woods?
Oh, yeah, Ranger's probably a good pick. So, obviously, all fans of Lord of the Rings aside, Ranger is built that way, and I think Elf Ranger was one of the top combinations played, which makes sense. Again, I went Elf, Halfling, Tabaxi. Rangers are built for that. Even if you're going the Hunter route, I think one of the early level bonuses is even +2 for hidden damage for archers. You get all the bonuses, you're built to use the bow, you're going to want the sharpshooter feat. But basically, you are built to use a bow, to use it very, very effectively, and sneaking around while shooting at people can be a lot of fun. And if you build them right, the rangers do a lot of damage. And one of the nice things with the bow is since they have Hunter's Mark, you just basically get to add an extra d6 to every arrow you shoot, which is a pretty sweet deal if you're the ranger from the back row.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of damage. It kind of helps make up for the lack of sneak attack.
Yeah.
But another good option for the archer, and this shouldn't really be a shock considering we touched on this earlier, the fighter is good at pretty much anything that involves, well, fighting.
Yeah.
So, no shock, it also extends to archery. So if you want the ability to shoot things from super far away and wear your armor and just be an all-around nuisance to the DM, fighter. Get fighter with your fighter.
And it is worth noting for fighter that for the races that work best with it, pretty much any race can make a good fighter. In part because fighters also get extra ability scores. If you're going to be an archer, you probably want to start with more dex. If you're going to be with swords, you want more strength. But as long as you keep that in mind, it's pretty easy to figure out what the best combos are. And if you pick wrong, you have extra level ups, so you can just fix your mistake, basically.
Pretty much. And if you decide you want to start your archery career, if your DM allows multi-classing, you want to start it as a fighter, so you get to use any and all weapons that you come across, so anything that shoots things fits well in your fighter hands, and then you decide, this isn't really for me, I'm going to go to ranger after a few levels of fighter. Great.
Yeah, and the first 2 levels of fighter are, I think, pretty much the favorite in 5th edition to multi-class into, so if you start as a fighter and go elsewhere, it still works, you're not going to be disappointed.
Yeah, and the first 2 levels of fighter give you pretty much everything you want. You get your proficiencies, you get action surge, you get second wind, you get a belly rub for picking the class. I mean, not to keep quoting Joe Cat, but he had it pretty much on the money.
So, okay. What if I'm an ambitious beginner, Braden, and I want to magic?
Ooh, wizard!
Beginner.
Right. Sorcerer.
Yeah, so as hard as it was for him to swallow down and say that, and I think we should start this with a caveat. All the magic classes, if you're a true beginner, are going to be more complex than the martial classes. Now, that shouldn't scare you away if this is what you really want to do, because magic is part of the fun of D&D. It's a huge part of the fun. And magic classes are awesome. But if you've never played the system before, or never played even a system with magic before, it is very easy to get complicated very quickly. And so having other players to guide you can help out. But among those classic casting classes, Sorcerer, in my view, is probably the easiest one to start with, if you really want to dive in.
I have to agree, although I will admit that I learned magic in D&D 3.5 on the wizard, which was a choice. But once you got over the insane learning curve, does kind of fit what I like to do. But that learning curve is not for everyone, and it is exceedingly steep. even in a streamlined system like 5th edition. So I have to admit, Sorcerer is the way to go. Your spells are generally more streamlined. You can easily cover for mistakes you make when leveling up because you can change out a known spell for another spell at each level of Sorcerer. So it's very, very beginner friendly in that regard, where this spell seems great, and then you take it out in the field and, oh, color spray just sucks. What if I try Sleep or Burning Hands instead? That's absolutely a thing you can do with the Sorcerer. And thanks to sorcery points, you can just keep using your favorite spells over and over and over again.
And also with Sorcerer, one of the nice benefits is when you know your spells, you know your spells. With Wizards, and to a lesser extent with Warlocks, you have your tome of spells, and that tome needs to be on you. And if you don't have it, you are stuck with whatever spells were prepped for the day. So you may know all these extra spells as Wizard that you can't use until you get a spellbook back. Which, fun shenanigans for in the party, if you're trying to learn the system, not the easiest thing. With Sorcerer, yes, you don't have the same access to spells that a Wizard has, not even close. But you can pick your spells, learn how to use them, and then that's what you have. And that takes a lot of the other surrounding pressure off that the other casting classes have.
Now that said, I would also argue that, since it came up a moment ago, Warlock is also an acceptable learner spellcaster class because it has a lot of the same spell limitations as the Sorcerer. It has a lot of the same ability for you to cover mistakes, as you're also allowed to replace known spells as you level up with the Warlock. At higher levels, you just get one spell of that higher level, so there's not a lot of complexity there. You can stay with the spells that you kind of grew and leveled with more easily as a Warlock. And many of the Warlock's invocations that you gain as you level up provide constant bonuses, where you get a thing, and it's a thing that's just there indefinitely.
Yeah, you have dark vision, even though you're a race that doesn't have dark vision.
Pretty easy to pick up and has a lot of the same strong points. The trade-off being there are a lot of different flavors of Warlock, and some of them are much, much, much more complicated than the Sorcerer to play correctly.
Yeah, and so it's a fun class. It's actually one of my personal favorites, and if you're big into role-playing and background, you have endless options for role-playing the background of a Warlock or how they came to be. But at the same time, it's one of those where it can be a very good beginner class. It can get a little bit more complicated to really effectively at high levels, especially if the invocations kind of trip you up a bit, because I do feel like knowledge of the game definitely helps with playing a better Warlock, more so than with a Sorcerer, where Sorcerer you can figure out pretty quick.
Absolutely. And half-elves or tieflings are both really good picks for either of these classes because they both give you charisma bonuses for just being that race.
Which is your casting stat for either the Warlock or the Sorcerer.
And on top of that, they tend to give you things that you would already get, particularly from Warlock. So you get to enjoy more of what the Warlock has to offer. Or you get to dip your toes in if you're playing Sorcerer and get a few of the Warlock's neat perks.
Yeah.
Both pretty solid options.
So, alright, I want to fight, but dip my toes in magic.
Okay, so you want to mix some magic in with your fighter.
Yep.
Okay, I'm here for that, and we'll leave Eldritch Knight out of the discussion because I think we've covered the fact that fighters do everything.
Everything, yeah.
We've beaten that horse beyond death at this point. So let's go to one of my personal favorites, and that's the Paladin. Because while you can convert your spells into smites, some of your spells are smites in their own right, or can do other useful utilitarian things if you decide that you want to get a little more creative with your spellcasting. You've got a wide pool to play in, but it's very shallow as far as how often you can actually splash.
Yeah, you have a limited number of spells and a limited number of spell slots. And for most paladins, they're happy to use all of them just to keep on smiting. And that's a perfectly acceptable way to play. It's actually a very effective way to play. But if you just want to dabble with an odd spell here or an odd spell there, you can have that just in your back pocket. So maybe there's a social situation or a different out of fight situation. Well, you can test out the spell casting a little bit, see what it has to offer, see how the mechanics work, see if you actually like it. And a paladin is a really capable class. Like, it's not complex. That's why we've already had it on the list. So it's an excellent one if you want a little taste of everything without getting overwhelmed. I also think Ranger is a good option. Because Ranger has a few spells that are very good attack spells, but also they have support spells. So if in the future you think, well, maybe I want to be a bard, or maybe I want to dive into wizardry, getting a taste of how support spells actually work is a really, really good idea. Because it's a very different thing from just throwing a fireball in the corner versus which of these 3 spells help my party out the most. Is it the one that slows down the enemy, the one that boosts their stats? Should I heal here? And figuring that out is a part of figuring out how support casting works. And Ranger, you can do that, or you can just make everyone invisible with Pass Without a Trace, or you can just start shooting people from a distance. So it's a really good combo to get that fight, that sneak, that magic. You get a little bit of everything, and in a way that's not overwhelming.
And the nice thing about the Ranger as well is that I've observed a lot of these spells that Rangers commonly like to lean on have the benefit of being bonus actions. Looking at you, Hunter's Mark. So you can cast your spell without sacrificing your ability to shoot, which is another very, very nice perk that isn't really as prevalent in most of the other dip your toe into magic while fighting spellcasting classes.
Yeah, and I would say Warlock is one where, once again, depending on the build you go with, there are some Warlocks who are mostly magic casters, but there are some that are very much built to be support in combat as well. And so if you go through the book, if you go through Xanathar's and look at the different options, it's clear some of them are built to basically be magical fighters. And so if you want a little bit of both, go with those, take a look at what the class features are. And at that point, you're basically playing a fighter with a few extra Warlock things.
Which is pretty awesome. I mean, there are enough variations on Pact of the Blade now that you can take it in a few different directions. And honestly, I would be hard-pressed to argue there is a more versatile class than Warlock as far as what you're able to do. Like, if you just aren't sure whether you want to dip into magic or fighting, Warlock really gives you kind of the best of both in a lot of different directions. The only one that really competes with it is the fighter.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you go Warlock and you go, was it Hexblade and Pact of the Blade, either one, you have the ability to say, okay, I don't care for the magic as much. Well, you can play it mostly as fighter from that point on and just have a few spells for your back pocket. Or you decide, oh, I really like the magic. Then you can just go that direction, except unlike the Sorcerer and Wizard, you don't automatically panic the moment a melee fighter closes ranks with you. Because you can actually hold your own, and you have more than a d6 for hit points.
Yep.
And to kind of summarize, beginner-friendly classes for true beginners to 5th Ed: Barbarian, Ranger, Rogue, Paladin, Fighter, and among magic casters, we'll say Sorcerer and Warlock. On classes that are not true beginner-friendly, Cleric, Monk, and depending on what you want to do with Warlock, that can get a bit complicated, but once again, that's how complicated you make it for yourself. Classes that are fun, they're a blast, they're favorites of many experienced players, but they are not beginner-friendly, and I would usually recommend a true beginner steer away from one of these first, unless they're dead set on it, because you want that good first experience to learn the system before you really dive in. But Artificer, Bard, Druid, and Wizard. Fun classes, not beginner friendly in any shape or form.
They're all 4 of those classes, and Cleric too, require you to have a very solid understanding of 5th edition's magic system through and through in order to take advantage of them to their fullest. So you're going to be spending some time looking in the back half of the book at what your spell options are, what they do, how you can use them to benefit the party, and that can be an awful lot.
Yeah, and especially with, how do I balance the druid's magic versus how they shapeshift? And then you have types of invocations and types of different paths you can take, and it gets very overwhelming very quickly. With bards are very much built with, oh, you already know how all the systems of magic work, so you can balance how to do 3 things at once. And if you're new, no you don't, and no you can't. And the bard is pretty squishy, so if you don't know what you're doing, you'll be rolling those death saves quite a bit, and that does not make for the funnest original experience at the table.
Yeah, it's very hard for a bard to be sneaky with their actions as well as their words, and you can't be sneaky with your words forever. Someone's gonna cotton on you eventually, and you're gonna make an enemy.
Yep. So, that's it. We strongly encourage anyone who hasn't played before, find a group and jump in. It is loads of fun. And don't let the words like basic or beginner friendly scare you off. That doesn't mean you have less fun. In a good campaign, every player has a role. Learning the system just opens up more possibilities, not only for playing new classes, but also doing really interesting things with the classes that you enjoy. And honestly, you never know which ones you're going to fall in love with. Like, I would not have guessed that Ranger and Bard would be my thing. And 5 years later, here we are. And clearly, among the 5th ed classes, Ranger and Bard are my thing.
And conversely, if you're a more advanced player who's been tuning in just to kind of brush up on their basics or see what we have to say on the subject, just because we have been making a lot of fun of classes like the Fighter, if that's your jam, go for it.
And have fun with it.
Do not let us taint that for you in any way. Different people are going to enjoy different elements of gameplay, and the nice thing about 5th edition D&D is that it's streamlined enough that any of the simple classes we've outlined are very easy to just hit the ground running and play.
Yeah.
But you can also dress them up quite a bit and make them your own and do some really cool advanced stuff with them too. So just because we say something's good for beginners does not mean that it's worthless to advanced players. Quite the opposite.
Well, and even among many of these beginner-friendly classes, if you get all the side books, some of them have subclasses that are not necessarily beginner-friendly, but they trust that you've played the game long enough, you know how to play off of it. So that's what we got for you. Those are the beginner-friendly classes, and those are the ones that, if you're completely new, maybe you wait till your second campaign to play. Sorry, Wizard, sorry, Bards. It is.
It is what it is. I accept your words.
So, that's it. What do you guys think? What are your favorite opening classes? What was the first class you ever played? Did you get lucky and pick the right one, like, I did? Or did you make a decision and decide to go Wizard 3-5?
Look, I made the right call for me. It's definitely not the right call for a lot of people.
So we'd love to hear your stories. Who was your first character? What was the adventure? Is there anything you would add on to what we say or any tips you give to beginners? Let us know in the comments. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It helps out enormously. And until next time, good gaming!
See you next time!
If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.